Hey everyone. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know what you think about the characters and their choices. Enjoy the story. I had always considered myself a loyal wife. After 8 years of marriage, I thought I understood what it meant to be in a committed relationship. But I was also human, and sometimes, being a woman in her early 30s, I felt a bit invisible. I wasn't sure when it started, but there was this nagging feeling that I was fading into the background of my own life. Dave and I had a good marriage. We weren't perfect, but who is? He worked hard and I worked too. We both had demanding jobs. We didn't fight much, but lately, there was this distance between us. He was distracted, and I couldn't help but feel like he was no longer interested in me the way he used to be. It wasn't a huge thing, at least not at first, but it weighed on me. When you feel unnoticed for too long, you start to question everything. I tried talking to him about it, but the conversation never went anywhere. "I'm just busy with work," he'd say. "You know how it is." And I did. But the emptiness inside me was growing, and I couldn't ignore it. That's when the invitation came. A work party, an event meant to celebrate the new quarter's success. Normally, Dave would be my plus one, but he had to work late that night. "Go ahead," he said. "You could use a night out." At first, I didn't want to go alone. But then I thought, why not? I threw on a simple black dress, a little makeup, and felt a flicker of excitement. It had been so long since I'd done something just for me. When I arrived at the party, the atmosphere was light and carefree. People were laughing, music was playing, and the tension I had been carrying around melted away. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. That's when I saw him. Josh. He worked in another department, but we had bumped into each other a few times at the office. I'd always thought he was attractive, but I had never thought much beyond that. Until now. He was standing near the bar, looking over at me with a smile that seemed to say, "I've been waiting for you." I smiled back and walked over to him, trying to act casual, but my heart was racing. "Hey, Josh," I said, trying to sound relaxed. "Hey, Al," he said with that easy grin that made me feel both flattered and a little nervous. "You look amazing tonight." I laughed softly, brushing my hair behind my ear. "Thanks. You clean up well too." We talked for a while about work, about the party, but there was something different in the air. The more we talked, the more I felt his attention. It wasn't just polite small talk, it was as if he was actually interested in me. And I won't lie, I was flattered. As the night wore on, we drifted closer. He was leaning in, his voice dropping just slightly as he asked, "So, tell me, are you here with anyone?" I could have told him about Dev. I could have made it clear that I was happily married, but something inside me held back. Instead, I just shrugged. "No, Dave had to work late." "Too bad," Josh said, his tone almost teasing. "Would have been nice to meet him." We moved on to the dance floor after that. I hadn't danced in so long, and the music was perfect for letting go. At first, it was innocent, just moving to the rhythm, but then something shifted. Josh's hands found their way to my waist, and I didn't pull away. I felt the warmth of his body, the way his fingers brushed the edge of my dress. My heart skipped a beat. He smelled good, his cologne mixing with the scent of alcohol and laughter. "Do you always dance like this?" he asked, his breath warm against my ear. I smiled, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. "Only when I'm having a good time." We danced closer, and I could feel his body against mine, his hands moving lower, more assertively. I should have stopped him. I should have pushed him away. But in that moment, I didn't want to. I wanted to feel alive again. I wanted to feel desired, and Josh made me feel exactly that way. Before I knew it, the music slowed, and his lips were on mine. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but then it deepened. I didn't stop him. I didn't pull away. I kissed him back, feeling the rush of adrenaline, the thrill of doing something I knew I shouldn't. When we finally broke apart, both of us were breathless. "Wow," Josh said, grinning. I wasn't expecting that, neither was I. But now, there was no going back. The rest of the night passed in a blur. We left the party together, walked down the street, and talked like we had known each other for years. I felt a strange sense of excitement, a kind of freedom I hadn't felt in so long. For a moment, I wasn't a wife, or a mother, or a worker. I was just me, and Josh saw me. Not the woman who had been ignored for too long, but someone worth noticing. I knew I was playing with fire. I knew I was crossing a line. But at that moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. When we said goodbye, Josh leaned in for another kiss, and I let him. It wasn't planned. It wasn't something I had thought through. It was just something that happened. And as I walked home that night, I felt both exhilarated and terrified. When I got home, Dave was already asleep, his phone charging on the nightstand. I tried to slip into bed quietly, but he stirred, groaning softly before pulling me closer. "How was the party?" he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. "It was fine," I whispered, trying not to let my racing heart give me away. He didn't ask me anything else. He never did. The next day was a whirlwind of confusion. I woke up with the events of the night still swirling in my mind. The kiss, Josh's touch, the excitement of feeling noticed. It all felt so alive. But there was this dark weight inside me, gnawing at my conscience. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done something wrong. I knew I was married. I knew what I had with Dave was important. But in that moment, I also felt like I hadn't been seen in so long, that the attention Josh had given me was something I desperately craved. I tried to convince myself it was just a kiss. No big deal. It wasn't like I had done anything serious. But the guilt kept creeping in. I didn't tell Dave about Josh, of course. I didn't even want to think about the implications. I tried to push the memory of it away, but it lingered, like a shadow I couldn't outrun. The thing was, Dave didn't seem to notice. He didn't ask about the party, or how I was feeling after it. He barely said anything about my night out, just that he was glad I had a chance to relax. And that bothered me more than I cared to admit. Was that all I was to him now? A person who existed in the background of his life. I didn't feel cherished. I didn't feel special. The following week, things between Dave and me felt like they were on autopilot. We barely talked outside of work, related stuff. I would try to engage him in conversation, asking how his day went or if he wanted to do something together, but most of the time, he was too distracted, staring at his phone or watching TV. It felt like we were just two people coexisting, passing each other like ships in the night. That's when Josh started texting me more frequently. At first, it was small talk. "Hey, how's your day going?" Or, "What's your plan for the weekend?" But then, slowly, it escalated. He began complimenting me more. "You looked amazing the other night," he'd say. "I can't stop thinking about our kiss." And I let myself enjoy it. I didn't push him away. I could have ignored his messages, could have told him I wasn't interested, but I didn't. I was getting the attention I had been craving for so long, and the more he sent me messages, the more I felt alive. In a weird way, it was like a game, one that I didn't want to lose. One evening, after a long day at work, Josh invited me to meet him for drinks. I hesitated. I didn't want to betray Dave, but I also didn't want to feel invisible anymore. So, I agreed. Just drinks. I told myself. Nothing else. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just about drinks. I knew that I was already too far in. We met at a small bar downtown, a place where no one would recognize us. Josh was already there, sitting at a table by the window. When I walked in, he looked up and smiled, that same smile that always made my heart race. "Hey," he said, standing to greet me. "You look stunning tonight." I laughed, trying to play it cool. "Thanks, Josh. You're not so bad yourself." We sat down, and the conversation flowed easily, just like it had at the party. But this time, it felt different. There was an intensity between us, a tension that wasn't there before. Josh leaned in closer, his hand brushing against mine on the table. "You know, I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I've been wanting to see you again since that night." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to pull away, to remind myself that I was married, that this was wrong. But the other part of me, the part that felt neglected and invisible, wanted to hear him say more. So I just nodded, not sure if I was doing the right thing or not. "Josh," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. This is crazy. I'm married." "I know," he replied. "But sometimes the heart wants what it wants." And with those words, everything inside me just snapped. My heart raced, my thoughts went blurry, and before I could think it through, Josh kissed me again. This time, there was no hesitation. I kissed him back, feeling that familiar rush of excitement, the feeling of being desired, something I hadn't felt in so long. It wasn't about love. It wasn't even about passion. It was about wanting to feel alive, to feel seen, to feel like I mattered. And in that moment, I mattered to Josh. We didn't stop there. We spent hours talking and laughing, and as the night went on, I found myself drawn into his world. The flirtation turned into more, and as we parted ways that night, I couldn't deny that part of me was thrilled by it. But that night, as I lay in bed next to Dave, I didn't know what to think anymore. How was it possible to feel both guilty and exhilarated at the same time? My heart was torn in two. One part of me clinging to the life I had with Dave, and the other part, the part that felt neglected and unnoticed, chasing after the excitement Josh gave me. I didn't tell Dave what had happened. I didn't tell him about the kiss, or the drinks, or the way I had betrayed him. Instead, I curled up next to him, pretending that everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. Not anymore. I had crossed a line, and I wasn't sure if I could go back. The guilt was starting to sink in, but there was something else there too. I wasn't sure what it was. Regret or relief. I couldn't tell. All I knew was that I had to make a choice soon. But, at that moment, I didn't want to face it. The next few days felt like a blur of conflicting emotions. I was back home with Dave, and everything looked normal on the outside. We went through our daily routines. He went to work, I worked from home, we had dinner together, exchanged polite pleasantries. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. The tension in me was building, the guilt eating away at my insides, but also, I couldn't ignore the excitement that had become a strange new part of my life. Josh and I continued texting, and our conversations became increasingly intimate. It wasn't just compliments or small talk anymore. He told me he thought about me all the time, and, in return, I found myself thinking about him more and more. I began to dread coming home to Dave's indifferent affection, the emotional distance that seemed to have grown between us. What was I still holding on to? I kept telling myself it wasn't anything serious. It was just a flirtation, a brief moment of excitement. Nothing to make a big deal about. But the more Josh reached out, the more it seemed like I needed him in my life. I wanted his attention, his affection, even if it wasn't something that could last. One evening, Josh invited me to his place again. I debated for hours, running the scenarios in my head. What if Dave found out? What would I do? Could I handle the guilt? But the truth was, I didn't want to stop. I felt alive in a way that I hadn't in a long time. So, despite the warnings in my head, I told Dave I was going out with some friends from work, and I left. When I walked into Josh's apartment that night, he greeted me with a warm, almost expectant smile. He had cooked dinner, and we ate together, laughing and talking about everything and nothing. There was a comfort between us, an ease that I hadn't felt with anyone in a while. The night went on and eventually, we found ourselves on the couch, talking less and less. And then the next thing I knew, his lips were on mine again. It wasn't just the kiss. It was the way he touched me, the way he made me feel like I was the most important person in the room. That night was different. It wasn't about the rush anymore. It wasn't about rebellion or escaping my marriage. It was about wanting something more. I wanted to feel cared for in a way that I wasn't getting from Dave. And Josh, for all his flaws, made me feel that way. I won't go into every detail of what happened next. It wasn't about that. What mattered, though, was the realization that I had crossed a line I couldn't come back from. Afterwards, as I lay there, trying to breathe normally, I thought about Dave, the man I had built my life with. The man who loved me, but somehow couldn't see me anymore. He didn't even notice when I started pulling away from him, emotionally. He was there, physically, but he wasn't really there. I wasn't justifying what I had done, but in that moment, it felt like an escape, an attempt to feel something when everything else felt numb. I left Josh's place early that morning, my mind a mess of emotions. Guilt, confusion, and a strange sense of numbness. I didn't know what to think or feel. When I got home, Dave was already awake. His back was turned as he sipped his coffee, his eyes fixed on his phone. "You're up early," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't look at me. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep. I've got a meeting in an hour." I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. I wanted to tell him everything. I wanted to confess, to admit what I had done. But the words didn't come. It felt like the damage was already done, even before I went to Josh's place that night. The emotional distance had already stretched so far that I didn't think anything would fix it anymore. I made some coffee, and we went about our day. We didn't talk about the party, or my night out, or anything that was weighing heavily on me. I wanted to confess, but a part of me was terrified of what would happen if I did. What would Dave do? Would he leave? Would he forgive me? Or would it just make things worse? The days after that felt like a haze. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me every time I saw Dave. I didn't know how to act, what to say. We were still going through the motions. Work, dinner, bed. But the cracks in our relationship were becoming more and more evident. But it wasn't until I sent that photo to Dave that everything came crashing down. One night, as I was lying in bed, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Josh. I miss you, it read. Without thinking, I snapped a photo of myself, looking directly into the camera, making sure my lips were slightly parted, as if I were in the middle of a kiss. It was a spontaneous moment, but I felt an overwhelming need to send it. Maybe it was my way of testing Dave. Maybe it was a way to see if he still cared, if he was paying attention to me. I hesitated before hitting send, but I couldn't stop myself. The photo left my phone, and I lay there, waiting for something to happen. When Dave saw it, he didn't react. Not at first. He didn't say anything when he saw the message pop up on his phone. He just went to bed like usual, but I could feel the tension in the air, a coldness that hadn't been there before. It was as if everything had shifted in an instant. That night, as I lay beside him, the silence between us was deafening. He didn't ask about the photo. He didn't ask about anything. But I could feel that something was off. He knew something was different, even if he didn't say anything. But I also knew. I knew that this was the beginning of the end. It was a few days after I sent the photo to Dave that everything finally came to a head. The tension between us was palpable. I could feel it in the way Dave avoided eye contact, in the way his responses were short, distant. It was as if the photo had opened a door neither of us knew how to close. I tried to pretend like everything was fine, like I hadn't done anything wrong. I kept telling myself that the photo didn't mean anything, that it was just a way to get his attention to see if he cared. But, deep down, I knew the truth. It was a cry for help. A desperate, stupid attempt to fix something that I had already broken. Dave hadn't brought it up directly, but I could see it in his eyes. It was like he knew, but he didn't know how to confront me. It was maddening. I wanted him to ask me about it. I wanted him to demand the truth. But he didn't. He kept his distance, like he was trying to protect himself from something he couldn't quite name. One evening, a few days after the photo incident, we were sitting at the dinner table. I had made pasta, our usual comfort food. Dave picked at his food, not really eating. He was staring at his plate, and I could feel the weight of his silence. It was unbearable. Finally, he put his fork down and looked up at me, his eyes tired. "Lena," he said, his voice unusually calm, "we need to talk." My heart skipped a beat. I knew what was coming, but I wasn't ready for it. "About what?" I asked, trying to play it cool, but my voice betrayed me. "Too high, too anxious?" "About us?" he replied. "About everything that's been going on." There it was, the conversation I had been avoiding, the one I knew would come, but had no idea how to handle. My mind raced, and I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I wanted to apologize, to confess everything, but I couldn't find the words. Dave leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. "Lena, I don't know what's going on with you. But I can feel it. Something's changed. You're not the same, and I don't know how to fix it." I swallowed hard. This was it. I could tell him everything. How I had been seeing Josh, how I had kissed him, how I had allowed myself to drift away from Dave. I could confess my betrayal, lay everything out on the table, and hope that he would somehow forgive me. But in that moment, I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Instead, I just nodded, my eyes filling with tears. "I don't know what's happening either," I whispered. "I don't know how to fix it." Dave's gaze softened, but there was something else in his eyes. Disappointment, hurt, maybe even resignation. "You don't have to fix anything," he said quietly. "You just need to be honest with me." I looked at him, and in that moment, I realized that I had already destroyed whatever we had. It wasn't the kiss with Josh or the photo, it was the emotional distance that had been growing between us for months, maybe even years. The neglect, the quiet isolation, the feeling that I wasn't enough for him anymore. Those were the things that had led me to this point. The silence between us stretched on, and I could feel the weight of my guilt bearing down on me. I knew I had betrayed his trust, but I didn't know how to fix it. And, worse, I didn't know if I wanted to fix it. The person I had been before, the woman who had been so in love with him, seemed so distant now. I had changed. I had allowed myself to be swept away by someone else's attention, and I didn't know how to come back from it. Dave reached across the table and took my hand. His touch was gentle, but I could feel the tension in his fingers. "Lena, I need you to tell me the truth. What's going on? Are you seeing someone else?" His question hung in the air like a weight, and I felt my heart race. The truth was, I had been seeing someone else. I had kissed him, spent time with him, shared things with him that I should have been sharing with Dave. But I wasn't ready to say it. Not yet. Instead, I just shook my head, tears starting to spill down my cheeks. "No," I said, barely able to whisper. No, I haven't. It's just, I don't know anymore. I don't know who I am. Dave didn't say anything after that. He just stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the street below. I stayed at the table, frozen, my hands shaking. My lie hung between us, thick and suffocating. I knew it wasn't true, but I wasn't ready to face the consequences. For the next few days, things between us became even more strained. We barely spoke, and when we did, it was awkward and uncomfortable. I couldn't look him in the eye without feeling like a fraud. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to confess and beg for his forgiveness, but every time I tried to speak, the words caught in my throat. Finally, on a Sunday evening, after a long, tense week, Dave came home from work early. He was holding his phone in his hand, his face pale and unreadable. "I know," he said, his voice barely audible. I froze, my heart pounding. "What?" "I know about the photo," he said, looking at me with a mixture of hurt and anger. "I saw it. I saw the messages. I know what you've been doing." I didn't know how to respond. The truth was out. My betrayal had been uncovered, and now I had to face the consequences of my actions. Dave stared at me for a long moment, his eyes searching mine, as if trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. "Lena, I don't know if I can ever trust you again," he said quietly. "But I need to know. Why? Why did you do it?" I felt my chest tighten, the guilt crashing over me in waves. I wanted to say everything, to pour out the reasons behind my actions, the loneliness, the neglect, the need to feel wanted. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just said, "I'm sorry." It didn't feel like enough. It never would be. Dave didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, consumed by the weight of my mistake.